So now let's talk about the nervous system. This section will cover how the nervous system is organized as well as the functions of our peripheral nervous system. Here's how our nervous system is organized. You can sort of think about it as two components. There's the central nervous system, which in turn include the brain and the spinal cord. We've talked an awful lot about the brain so far, but we'll talk a little bit about the spinal cord in this lecture. And then there's the peripheral nervous system, which has a couple subdivisions actually. So first it divides into the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. And then the autonomic nervous system itself divides into sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, or what we'll call divisions. So we'll discuss those as we go along. So first, as we mentioned, we'll talk about the spinal cord. The spinal cord includes 31 pairs of spinal nerves, which exit between the bones and the vertebrae, as you can see here, or the bones of the vertebrae, as you can see here. And these bring information back to our central nervous system, as well as carry motor commands out to muscles. Those are sort of the main functions of our spinal cord. The spinal nerves and reflexes are described here. There's a lot of important reflexes that happen, of course, automatically, that are initiated by our spinal cord without the assistance of the brain whatsoever. So these provide an opportunity to look at the functions of three different types of neurons. First, there's sensory neurons that carry information about our external environment from our body back to our sensory nervous system. And this is sort of, this whole set is sort of described here in this figure. There are motor neurons that carry commands from the central nervous system back out to the muscles as well as to the glands of our body. And then there are the sort of in-between neurons, I like to think of them, or interneurons, which have neither sensory nor motor functions, but play roles in more complex reflexes in general throughout our nervous system. So three types: sensory, motor, and interneurons. The somatic nervous system and the cranial nerves are described here. So the somatic nervous system transmits commands for voluntary movement from our central nervous system to our muscles. So this is what enables us to move around, basically. It also brings sensory input back to the central nervous system so that we can further process it. And these are carried out by the 31 pairs of spinal nerves that we described before, as well as 12 pairs of cranial nerves serving our head, neck, and even some internal organs. Then we discuss the autonomic nervous system and how that works. So our autonomic nervous system really is responsible for homeostasis, basically regulating all of our body functions so that we sort of stay on an even keel. These things include temperature and thirst and our fight and flight response and so forth. The autonomic nervous system, as I mentioned, contains two subdivisions: the sympathetic division and the parasympathetic division. The operation of the internal organs in response to environmental stimuli reflects inputs from both of these things, both the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions. So the sympathetic division, these nerve cells are found in the middle regions of the spinal cord, the torso, and the lower back, and basically prepare our body for expending energy. So that's the critical part of the sympathetic division. When we feel like we need energy for some reason quickly, probably because of a stress or some emergency or so forth, the sympathetic division jumps into action. Alternatively, the parasympathetic division, these things happen, are located in the brain or in the lowest segments of the spinal cord, and these tend to direct the storage of energy instead of the expenditure of energy. So again, the sympathetic division focuses on expending energy really fast, whereas the parasympathetic division sort of is responsible for recovering and storing our energy. So as a result, as I mentioned, the sympathetic division handles things like emergencies that can be resolved relatively quickly. So for example, worrying about far distant dangers like next month's rent or upcoming exams, that didn't exist for previous human beings. It only exists for us fairly recently. So anytime we identify something as one of these significant threats, our sympathetic division goes into action, which causes all kinds of problems at times, especially when there's not a real honest-to-goodness threat that's kind of acute out in the environment, but it's more of a chronic kind of worry that we have. We still tend to activate this sympathetic nervous system and sort of force ourselves to expend lots of energy. So here you can see the differences between the autonomic nervous system divisions. Over here, this is our component for parasympathetic nerves, sort of the rest and digest phase. Over in the parasympathetic, again, focused on storing up energy. Our pupils become constricted. We tend to have more saliva. Our heartbeat slows. Our airways are constricted a little bit. We activate our stomach is stimulated. For example, we'll be more interested in eating. We reduce the release of glucose and we stimulate our gallbladder. We stimulate our activity of the intestines and so forth, etc. The parasympathetic, on the other hand, is not related to rest and digest, but instead fight or flight. So that requires us to dilate our pupils, we get dry mouth, our heartbeat increases, our airways become relaxed, we don't want to eat. Instead, glucose is released so that we have lots of energy for our muscles, we get a little jumpy, etc. A lot of people will recognize this as kind of a fight or flight response. And these are the kinds of things that happen when we tend to be stressed out over a long period of time.